I mean, you've definitely kicked it off just with the comment of unstable times. What are you feeling right now?
We are facing what could be a significant war, potentially, man.
So it's like, how in the heck did we get here? And it's very biblical. It seems very biblical. And all of it's supposed to basically culminate in some big battle called a Megiddo or Armageddon. And I think there's a lot of people that actually are hoping for this to happen.
I don't believe God has preference. How could he if we are all his kids? And if there's life after death, why would he care if we still live? He created it all, so every evil deed is judged the same as good. He loves the sinner same as the saint. He told us all he would. So why would God choose to take a side? What reason would he have to favor you or I? You think it's based on the amount of tears we cry or how long we say our prayers each night?
Adam Roa, what a pleasure to see you again, my friend. It's such a pleasure to have you on Think Tank. I wish we were in person, but we're off doing our own things right now, and we had a chance to catch up in person just a few weeks ago. So it's a pleasure to see you.
It's good to see you in these very unstable times. A friendly face is always appreciated.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you've definitely kicked it off just with the comment of unstable times. What are you feeling right now? And I'm sure that you've got some opinions on what's going on in the world. And by the way, I like how you're rocking the new, it's a new thing. Everyone that comes on Think Tank has to grow a goatee like this.
Yeah, I didn't realize how much gray would be in it. It's just significantly gray, giving away my age a little bit. But I would say that, we bombed the United States. When I say we, the United States and Israel have now bombed Iran. And there's like talks of Russia and China getting involved as we're recording this. So we are facing what could be a significant war, potentially, man.
Yeah, and we haven't really had something of this scale, potentially, if that happened in my lifetime. We always talked about it as kids, talked about the risk of nuclear war and stuff like that, but and a third world war during the Cold War era. But we haven't had something that could have risen to this scale. So it's like, how in the heck did we get here? And it's very biblical. It seems very biblical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you want to go into a bit of prophecy? You probably know more about it than me, but
basically, it reminds me as a kid, I used to watch all the shows about Nostradamus and how Nostradamus would make predictions and stuff. And they would talk about, this person in kind of the Middle East that would rise up. It was always referred to as the blue turban. Also reminds me of the bear, right, as being referenced in the book of Revelations, which is, the Russian bear. And then you've got China, which is often referenced as a dragon. I think and all of it's supposed to basically culminate in some big battle called a Megiddo or Armageddon. And Armageddon is actually a place. Megiddo is a place in Israel. I've been there. And it's this large field where there's supposed to be some, the whole world is against Israel. And I think there's a lot of people that actually are hoping for this to happen. It's like, okay, we've gotten to the point in the Matrix now where it's like gotten intense and weird enough. And we've got baby killing and pedophilia and corrupt politicians. And it's like, okay, you've kind of got this imagination of like, have you seen those memes that show like Jesus up in heaven smoking a cigarette? And he's like, I think I'll drown it again. I think I'll just bring on the floods type of thing.
Yeah.
If there ever were a time where people are probably feeling somehow that way, on the one hand, right, it's probably now, because it's so many things have become so dystopian. But on the other hand, I also know, I myself included, I'm experiencing like a blissful state on so many levels as I go through my own realizations and learning self-love. So it's like, it's weird because it's like, I'm seeing all this stuff on the news and media, but it's not really here around me. Right. And so that's another bizarre paradox that I'm having a challenging time kind of reconciling entirely, but that's kind of my feeling of it. I feel the compassion and I feel the pain for what I see, but at the same time, I'm not necessarily directly being impacted by it. That may be changing in the future, but right now, that's kind of how it feels.
Well, one thing that struck me about what you just said is that you are feeling compassion and empathy and pain for what
Oh
you can
yeah,
see, like what you see. And the first thought that pops into my head is, I don't really trust what I see.
yeah,
I
fair enough.
legitimately, I'll go on to one of these, like X, right? X in many ways is a giant cesspool of fake accounts and trolls and bots that are posting. What I'll notice is a video will get posted, and then suddenly that video is being reposted on all of these different accounts and different people and all these things. And then it come to find out that that video, the way it's being described, is not even true. That's not actually, it's being used out of context, or it's not even depicting the thing that it says it is. And it's circulating so fast that by the time it's revealed that that's not true, it's kind of too late, right? And it's shaped the narrative of people so deeply. And at this stage, I'm wondering how much you even trust your own eyes on some of this stuff.
That's a really good question. How do you basically make that assessment? Because another really good example of this is AI, right? So, for example, I did a post about a week or so ago that got a lot of views very quickly, and it had like an Alan Watts voiceover, right? And it had the crackling sound in the background and everything. And my team, Gabriel, who basically put this post together, was like convinced that it was actually Alan Watts' true voice, right? So normally you don't get any issues with that. Next thing I know, I get a message from Alan Watts .org saying that the post, and they love my work and all that stuff, but they wanted to inform me that the post that I did with Alan Watts' voice was actually just generated AI, and he never said those things. I'm like, that drives me
Yeah.
nuts. So of course I take it down immediately. It had only been up for a couple of hours, but it's like, how do we know? Because nowadays the AI is so real. I mean, you see all these posts that people do. It's almost like the new meme category, which is who did this posts, right? They do who did this with question marks, and they show like Trump or Barack Obama talking about how, like, he did this on Epstein Island. It's all fake. It's all completely fake. And they're kind of funny because they look so real. But it's kind of a caricature, bizarre meme on the state of society right now. Like, what in
So
the heck do we even know is real? I mean, you could have right now, they could have an announcement from Trump that could be completely contrived, made by the state of Russia, saying that, he's stepping down, and it could literally overtake all of the media very quickly. Hi, I'm Robert Edward Grant. I invite you to explore my transformative books, Philomath and Polymath, each designed to expand your understanding of the world and ourselves. In Philomath, which means lover of learning, discover how mathematics weaves together physics, music, and prime number theory, revealing the universe's interconnected nature. It's more than a book, it's an enlightening voyage. Polymath builds on Philomath's insights, exploring the genius of thinkers like Pythagoras and Da Vinci, who used geometry to revolutionize science, art, and governance. Rediscover the polymathic roots that sparked past ages of enlightenment. Join me on this journey as well. Visit robertedwardgrant.com to get your copies today. Let's foster a new era of enlightenment and collaboration for a brighter future.
do
And be
you
completely
remember,
false.
you were remember the story about when they did War of the Worlds, the reading over the radio? Do you remember
Yes,
this?
yes, that's
Across
right.
the United States, before television, they just had the radio, and they did a reading of War of the Worlds, and people thought it was real. People thought that the world was being invaded by aliens. They didn't know any better, and everyone's tuned in and listening to this radio show, and they didn't know it was real, and people freaked out. To me, this is that times a million. I think that it speaks to something deeply, and I'm not sure what it is, but I do think it speaks to something deeply spiritual, where we're needing to identify what is truth now in today's day and age. If you can't trust what you see, if you can't trust what you hear fully, not just on social media because it's been digitally created, but also we are now seeing that the people that we thought we could trust in person are all liars, right? Politicians, medical, what we saw with the pandemic and all of this stuff. Even the people in real life are liars. So when trust has eroded this deeply, I think it raises a very deep spiritual question about what truth actually is, and where do we go to identify and find truth.
Damn, that is very well said. I think that, I have some thoughts on that, about kind of like, is there a resonance for truth?
Well,
Right?
what
Because
I can tell
especially
you,
in a world of non-duality, in a world where, it's all narrative and spin. And by the way, it's always narrative and spin.
yeah.
It's just we're now waking up to it. I think that's part of the big aha, is that the world has always been full of narrative and spin. And the utopian childhood that I thought that I had, which was, growing up in England and then in Nebraska, where it's like we live and we're from the country that's the good guys, right? which which I always thought, okay, yeah, I'm happy to be American. And I remember saying to myself, it's like, okay, after studying Roman history and Greek history, I'd be like, wow, I'm so happy that I was born in Rome, type of thing. I'm a citizen of Rome. And now I kind of look at this, I'm like, oh gosh, there's some cringe elements about it that we're now finally waking up to and saying, geez, has it really been like this all along? And maybe very well it has. And we just have not been willing to
well,
confront the shadow of it.
something that I believe, this is just my own belief, which is that there can only ever be equal possibility for light and shadow, and in equal amounts, even meaning, a lot of people talk about a utopian ideal where we all live in peace and harmony, et cetera. And I say, okay, that's amazing to get to a point where people are making that choice. But the
Mm-hmm.
more, we can't expand in only one direction. We can't expand just in the direction of light or good or whatever. We expand holistically, like the whole thing expands. And therefore, just
It's
like
the
if you
Carl
saw
Jung
that,
statement, right? It's like the Carl Jung statement: for a tree's branches to reach high into the heavens, its roots have to reach deep into hell. And
right. And so we
duality.
can't ever just expand in one direction, which means that if we are expanding awareness, so let's say social media, the internet, connectivity, all of these things, AI is also expanding massive amounts of awareness in terms of what we can understand. When that's happening at such a fast pace, it's by my understanding of how this all works, the inverse of that, the shadow aspects are going to be revealed just as quickly and in just as large amounts. And I think that that's happening, and it's overwhelming to see just how much shadow is present.
I think your point is a really good one because, in fact, I was having this conversation just a couple days ago, um, and I went on Orion Architect to ask it the question. So I just asked it a bunch of questions about light and shadow and dark, and because I was kind of triggered a little bit by the discussion about people saying that so and so is a demon, right, or so and so has demons, and I was like, I'm not discounting the fact that demons exist, but what I am saying, though, is that for the people, because I believe this wholeheartedly, whatever you spot in someone else is what you actually have. And you're just unwilling to see it. So if you spot it, that means you got it. And it's always true. It's not sometimes true. It's not kind of true. It's like always true. And when you actually dig deeper into it. And so whenever someone says to me, oh, that person has demons or whatever, I'm like, oh my gosh, why is that person saying that? Because that person doesn't see the demons. And so themselves, they don't see it as themselves. They see the world as separate from them. And I don't see the world as separate from me now. I really don't. I look at the world, I meet someone, I meet you, I realize that you're just another aspect of me. It's like we're in a shared dream. And in that dream, I'm just in my own narrative part of the dream. And when I wake up, it's like, who was Adam? Well, it was still me in my dream. You follow what I'm saying? So
Yeah,
everybody else
absolutely.
in that dream, I could have this conversation. And so the point is that it's impossible, literally impossible, to have more light than darkness when you look at it not just from the side where darkness is the backdrop. When you look at it from the side of there's another world here, right? Which is like in the TV shows popularized, right, by Stranger Things, which they have this upside down world, right? So imagine there's an upside down world, and we're only seeing half of the world because we're not gained access. We have not gained access to the upside down world. And by the way, I see this in mathematics all the time. I mean, it's literally everywhere in math. And the separation line between the two is just x and 1 over x. It's that simple. So that's why I came up with this whole analogy of we're not living in a universe, we're living in a U inverse, right? So there's you, and then there's everything that is the absorbed aspects of you being reflected in the outer world around you as a projection back. And so as I looked at this, I started thinking the question of, okay, is it possible to have light without darkness? And the answer is no, because you cannot have light's reflection without light's absorption happening at the same time. And you can't look at the world in only the terms of the number plane that's in the non-reciprocalized plane, right? Reciprocal would just be the 1 over x aspect of it. So therefore, you have to look at it in both. And when you look at it in both, then there's always equal amounts of light and darkness. Always.
And the piece that I think is important for everyone to recognize is that the aspect of free will, which I think free will, or at least the mechanics of choice in this reality, are where we get to make the determination if we exist in heaven or hell. That's really our option, because like you said, there's the 1 and there's the 1 over x. There's us and there's everything that is not us outside of ourselves. And in each and every moment, we get to choose light, shadow, light, shadow, light, shadow, moment to moment. And when we continue to choose the most loving choice, when we continue to choose the aspects that we would call quote unquote good, those aspects will attract and reflect more of that back to us, right? And yet, if we think about it as dropping a stone into a pond, there's these ripples. For every single choice I make that is more beautiful, more loving, it's at the leading edge of goodness within me, I will create ripples of that. And eventually this world will represent and respond with more of those ripples back. But there will always be the equal opportunity for me to choose something that exists in the shadow. Always. And so no matter what we're seeing outside of ourselves right now in this crazy world, when people say, I'm feeling helpless, I'm feeling hopeless, honestly, it may sound almost trite or patronizing, but I come back to the real only thing that we have as an option in each and every moment is to make the most loving choice and try and create ripples of light rather than shadow.
Let's go into that, because I think your poetry touches on everything you just said. Like every poem I've ever heard you do, whether I've read them or whether you've been basically reciting them, has always touched on this liminal space between, this decision point or recognition point of light and darkness and seeing it within the self, whether you recognize that or not. Do you recognize that all your poems have both aspects in it?
What's funny about that is I've never heard anyone say it as just like clearly as you have, but I would agree with that. And on a recent podcast, because so people know I'm doing podcasts promoting my new book, Crazy Love, which is coming out in May. Someone asked me about how people respond to my poetry, and a woman said, "Your poetry always gives me hope." And I thought that's really interesting because most of my poetry is written in a time where I'm searching for it. And so I think my poetry really holds both, Robert, because um, it's the part of me that's searching. I write poetry oftentimes just seeking to find that hope. And so it's almost, you almost feel me working my way out of the shadow and finding a path
Yeah.
into the light.
Well, this is why I think, why do we have to suffer? Why do we have to go through difficulty and challenge? And I think it's because the one wants to experience limitation. I mean, if you're omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent, how do you even know what it's like to be omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent? The only way is if you experience what it's like to not be those things. And so it would never be any fun to play a game where you and I are both omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. No, you and I can play poker. And believe me, Adam and I have fun when we hang out. But the truth is that, like, we enjoy living in the contrast. It's the contrast of it. So I then see God as like a painter who loves all of the colors of the palette as much as any other color. The dark colors are necessary to make the pastels more beautiful. And it's no different than, when you go buy a diamond for someone that you love. And the first thing you want to do is you want to put that beautiful sparkling diamond in front of a black velvet cloth that absorbs all the light so that the brilliance of the diamond looks even more brilliant. To me, I think that's why your poetry is so beautiful, because you became a master of taking, and that's why people feel the hope. You always have a story within your poetry that is about going and reaching into a dark place. It's like the masterful use of the dark colors and the contrast so that it resolves. And it's a musical resolution. To me, it's a math. I've told you this before. You're doing beautiful artistry with mathematics, whether you recognize it or not. I get a mathematical feeling because it's like a resolution, looking into the abyss of numbers, which is what I spent the last 3 months. Oh my gosh, that's what I've been doing. Looking into the abyss of numbers that has supposed to have no patterns whatsoever, and then pulling out of the sea of what we perceive as randomness. But it's not actually randomness at all. It's all patterned, all of it. And what you're doing is you're going into this darkness of the challenge and the suffering and the difficulty, and you're pulling out the thing that makes sense of it all.
Well, can I share a poem, a short one, Robert, that I haven't finished? I don't normally do this, especially on a podcast, but this speaks to exactly what.
In fact,
this is a unfinished work in progress, but it's so relevant to what we're sharing here. Okay, everyone, take a nice deep inhale. I don't believe God has preference. How could he if we are all his kids? And if there's life after death, why would he care if we still live? He created it all, so every evil deed is judged the same as good. He loves the sinner same as the saint. He told us all he would. So why would God choose to take a side? What reason would he have to favor you or I? You think it's based on the amount of tears we cry or how long we say our prayers each night? No, God's more like a wildlife photographer, is there to observe it all but not interfere. How else could you explain my molestation at 5 or all the suicides every year? Human trafficking hasn't gone away. Child slaves still build our phones. Good people get evicted and live on the street while the greedy buy more homes. So if you really think God has a stake in this and he really cares where we are taking this, then I ask you to show me God's grace in this. Stop faking it when asked for proof God gave a shit. In the battle for good, he's fine letting evil win. Do you have any evidence that he's not? So if God doesn't have a preference, then it's up to us to make evil stop. And so that poem, Robert, is speaking to, I think, the conversation that we're having. As much as we, as human beings, we like to humanize God. to me, it says in all the ancient texts, in everything, it's God loves the sinner as the saint. It all just is. There is not a preference in that way. And I think that what that does then is make it the responsibility of us as human beings to take action based off of preference. If we don't want evil, and I can talk about my definition of evil, but if we don't want evil to win, it's not up to God. Like God sees the whole of it. And that's just one of my beliefs. And I know it goes against a lot of what you'll hear in kind of mainstream religious like sermons, but I'm curious how that lands for you, because it seems relevant to what we're talking about.
Oh, I think you nailed it. I think you nailed it. It's almost like we grew up in a world where we thought everything was supposed to kind of go one direction, but maybe that's not the purpose of it at all, right? We think that, it's more and more, it's like the Hindu perspective, I think, where you've got gods of destruction. And we tend to think of anything that's building something up, which is order, and that's a symbol that's basically been sort of like made into an iconic perspective for all of us in Osiris, which is the god of order, and Set was the god of disorder, right? So we tend to look at anyone who is ordered is in the more good side, and anyone who is disordered is in the bad side, the evil side. And I don't think that that's the way that the universe looks at itself. I think it looks at it more like a breath. It's like a breath. And one thing I've learned through all of this is that all the higher dimensions, I haven't done podcast in a long time. And the reason I have not is because since November, I've been in a nonstop, and I'm still in it right now, in a nonstop download on everything in the universe, mathematical, physics, you name it. And I've written over 100 papers. And even since you and I last saw each other, it's been even more intense. So it's not stopped. And this includes the entire mathematical framework for all higher dimension. Like literally, I've been downloading all of the higher mathematical frameworks, starting from the simplicity of right triangles that project into polytopes, and basically canonizing all of that. And I feel like it's a solemn responsibility that I have in order to do this. And I don't think that it's something that's a coincidence with what's happening in the timeline right now. And so therefore, I've not really been speaking much. I've been in hermit mode. I've been in hermit mode for 3 months. And I did this before in 2016, late 2016 and 2017, right before I met you in Egypt in 2017. That entire year and a half, I was in full-on hermit mode. All I was doing was artwork. All I was doing was mathematics. And a lot of that became the work of my books. But I'm way more prolific now because I can do much faster this work because of the advent of AI. And the architect has really helped with that too. But for me, I've been in sort of this very hermetic, sealed container where I've not allowed myself to go out and to see things or even to talk much about it at this moment in time. So this is the first such conversation I'm having. But what's happening right now is that as I do peek my head out every few days, right, every week or so, every few weeks, to kind of just look to see what's going on in the outside world, man, oh man, it is really, really accelerated. I think the Epstein revelation was a revelation where all of us are having to come to terms with, wait a minute, who are we? And what I realized too is that 5 years ago, I said to my mother, I said, Mom, I'm not going to judge anymore. I'm going to stop judging. And she's like, that's nice, son. And I said, no, but do you understand what I mean? She goes, well, I mean, does that mean that what does that mean? I said, I'm going to start looking at the world through a non-dual lens. And she said, well, what about pedophilia? And I said, yeah, you're right. I'm going to put that on the exclusion list, right? So I've got an exclusion list of things that I'm still going to judge. And, I don't know how to reconcile that. So that's just going to go in the parking lot, right? And then she goes, well, what about you get so triggered by government corruption and stuff like that. And she's like, you're just going to turn a blind eye to that? No. That's on the list too. I'm like, I'm going to put that on the list. And then she goes, well, what about killing innocent women and children? And it's like murder and kidnapping and all this kind of stuff and rape. I said, yeah, that all goes on the list now too. And during the last 5 years, one thing became very clear to me. It's that everything I judge becomes my reality. Literally everything I judge. I attract everything I judge until I no longer judge what I attract. And so I guess I probably shouldn't be that surprised that our world turned into a world full of, pedophile politicians that are corrupt, that are using that as the basis for blackmail to justify killing innocent women and children.
Well, you're touching on now something that, at least in kind of this small bubble of community, has blown up, which happened with Aubrey Marcus and his conversation with Dr. John DeMartini. Did you see this?
Where he was talking about the duality and non-duality,
and non-duality and pedophilia and all these things are being brought up, and it begs this question.
I didn't see it, but I heard about it.
Yeah, so the conversation is really about moral relativism, which is when we take the stance that everything's divine, everything serves a greater purpose, everything is just part of the whole, and I will not judge it. It's, you could say, creates the space for moral relativism, where we could in one moment take one side and another moment take another, or take no sides at all. But in reality of kind of the 3D, there's also got to be a balance, right, of the values that we do choose to stand for. And I think there's this really interesting conversation that's happening right now. And I'm curious your thoughts about how we avoid spiritually bypassing. How do we avoid going, it's all perfect? Yeah. Because I remember that I remember during COVID when I saw these spiritual influencers at the time that were doing these videos saying, just keep your frequency high and it won't even enter your reality. And I was like, you mother effers are making videos about it. Like, it's already in your reality. If you're making videos about the thing you're saying, shouldn't just keep your it. And so the hypocrisy was so evident to me. But I do think that sort of the spiritual bypass, everything's perfect idea can be a trap for people who actually feel so helpless and hopeless to almost take a more apathetic, I'm just not going to do anything or take a stand anywhere. So where do you fall on this place of, hey, there's values and morals that we do need to, in the 3D, say, hey, it's not okay to harm children. It's not okay to do this or that. Where do you fall on that? How do you draw the line?
I think the line for me is compassion and love for all, and being able to empathize with all those situations and to literally really feel it. I think one of the main reasons we're here on Earth is so that we can learn and experience feeling. That feeling is the thing. I mean, it's not something you can theorize, right? It has to be something that is, it's an experience. It's experiential. It's not something that you can learn. Like, learning limitation and learning how to transcend limitation is something that is not a didactic path. It's something that you have to actually experience and practice. And so we're here to feel, and the range of those feelings determines and defines in large part our experience. So how do we know what pain is if we don't know also what pleasure is, its opposite, or vice versa? Right? We learn through opposites. And in fact, if I believe that if I'm here to learn unconditional love, that I'm going to continue to experience its opposite over and over and over again until I no longer judge its opposite. And its opposite is betrayal. So that's why I lived a life experiencing betrayal many times over and over and over again, because I judged so harshly betrayal, until I finally said, okay, I can accept the concept of betrayal. I can accept it exists. It exists for a reason. For there to be betrayal, there also has to be likewise its equal opposite. Every action has an equal opposite reaction. So I looked at it from that perspective first and foremost. But I don't think that we're here to just simply say, oh, it's not real and it's fake. And so then that becomes our bypassing for not having empathy for any situation.
But
You can
where
become very
do
callous.
but where do you, how much energy will you put into working and even this term, right, against, because we
Yeah, I
there
won't put
is this.
energy into fighting something. And that's the other difference, right? Because what I realized is that everything I try to fight against only multiplies that thing. So if I wanted to pick something like deforestation, if I fight against the source of deforestation, whether it's large corporations or countries or whatever, it's just an extractive approach to nature. Then all that's going to happen if I start standing in front of the bulldozer and taking a selfie to show that I'm fighting against something and defining my hero ness with by defining the villain that I'm fighting against, right? So it's like the hero versus the villain. And I just said villo because that's kind of what we all are. We're all heroes and villains together. We're not a hero. We have a bias in this matrix of mind that we believe that we're heroes, and we believe that in order to define our identity, we have to have a villain to define it. That's very much the way we survive in many ways. We have to pick what we think is the thing that's worthy to fight against, worthy to fight for, because through our action of fighting against something. But I believe that if you wanted to do something about deforestation, the very best thing you can do is plant trees. So instead of fighting against the corporations and then creating more and more of those corporations in your own reality that are destroying the environment and destroying the forests around the world, go and plant trees. Make that your mantra. So it's not fighting against something, it's standing for something. There's a distinction. I think that distinction is very important.
So I agree with you in that distinction. And the way that I'll often talk about this is let's just use darkness and light again. Darkness doesn't actually exist, right? There's not just this thing that we say, hey, here's quantifiable darkness. What we're talking about is we're talking about the absence of the visible light. And at a certain point on that spectrum, one person might say, hey, it's dark outside. And someone else will be like, no, it's not. I don't think that's dark yet. And we're just talking about how much visible light is there, right? And so if we want to brighten a room, we can't remove the darkness. We actually have to add more light, more visible light into the room. That's how we, quote unquote, combat the darkness. And so I agree with you fundamentally on the idea that creating resistance against something, often it just helps it grow, because nothing grows without resistance. Everything grows when it has resistance, from going to the gym for our muscles.
It's very true.
Right. Now, and in the 3D, very human experience, if you and I were out somewhere and someone was physically threatening us or someone we loved, for example, in that moment, we will take physical action to resist. Well, I'll speak for myself. I would take physical action to resist in that state. And so in my worldview, at least, there are times where resistance is necessary. And I'm curious if how, from the perspective that we're talking about, trying to hold a higher level of consciousness in a conversation like that, but still acknowledging the honesty of, in certain moments, there's going to be resistance necessary if it's a matter of life or death or whatever. And then how does that apply to what we're seeing on a grand scale right now with corporations, politicians, et cetera?
I'll give you a quick story. When I came back from being a Mormon missionary, yes, I was a Mormon missionary way back when. I was only in the Mormon church for 10 years, and I realized that it wasn't for me. But when I was a Mormon missionary, when I was 19 years old, I went to South Korea. I came back from South Korea, and I went to visit a friend of mine who took the opposite path. He was not Mormon. He went to USC, and we went to go hang out one night in Hollywood. USC is not in the best part of town. It's the private school that's in the worst part of town. UCLA is the nicest part of town. It's like a really, really nice campus and everything, but USC is not so much. And so we decided to go, and I had never really spent any time in Hollywood. So I'm like, let's go check out Hollywood. So we go to Hollywood, and I was like rail thin because I had I had a tapeworm when I was in South Korea. Oh my God, it was unbelievable. I got down to like 120 pounds or something crazy like that. So I was like super skinny, and we're walking down the street on Hollywood Boulevard. And what happens to people on Hollywood Boulevard? Well, I get mugged. Right? It's like I get mugged. So this guy comes up to me, pulls a gun on me. Right? My life could have ended right then and there. Pulls a gun on me and says, "Give me your money." And thankfully, I had, I don't know, I never get stressed in these type of situations. I stay pretty calm. And I have kind of an opposite. That's probably why I have narcolepsy. When I'm in high stress situations, it's more likely I'll fall asleep than anything else. Like, because I get so calm, my blood pressure drops so low, I'll actually pass out. It does happen. But luckily I didn't pass out in this, but I got very calm and I just said, "Hey, you don't need to pull a gun on me. I'll just give you the money." And next thing I know, I'm talking with this guy. He puts the gun down. I hand him, I give him my wallet and I said, "Here's everything I got in my wallet." I had like $40. It was nothing, right? It was nothing. And I said, "But just let me keep my driver's license and stuff. I understand what you're going through. And I'm happily going to give you this money." And then we walked on the street and we started talking with this guy. And, he put his gun away and he calmed down. And I mean, I know there's probably countless stories where it goes a different direction than that, but I started to treat him like a friend and started asking him what he's been going through. And he started crying. He didn't want to be in that situation. Now, at that time, I didn't realize that he wasn't separate from me. I thought that he was in a different world where there were evil and I was good and I'm the hero and he's the villain. I could have chosen a different path, and I could have chose to try to argue with him and fight with him and, "Why are you taking my money?" And, it could have gone very badly, but it didn't. And I've never even told this story before. I don't think I've ever mentioned this story before, but I remember feeling like that was the first moment that I started realizing, because I felt compassion and I felt empathy for this person, that he was in a state where he had to do that, where he felt like he had no choice but to do that. And that's not always the case. Sometimes there's really just bad actors in the world. It does happen. But I remember feeling for a moment the compassion for that person after he left us. We went to a diner after that. And after he left us, I was like, damn, is that guy really that different than me? And I think that's the first moment I realized that the world around me was kind of a reflection. And I started asking myself the question. Now I would say, if someone came up to me like that on the street, I would probably act in a similar way, but I would immediately know that that representation of a person in front of me that's pulling a gun on me is actually something crying out within me that I'm unaware of, that needs yet to be reconciled and recognized. And I think that's what's happening in the world around us right now. All of the negativity and everything, it's like, we're not going to change the world by trying to change the world outside of us. I think we can only change the world by changing within, and then having the world outside of us reflect a different inner peace within us.
I agree with you.
That's what I see.
I think that the challenge becomes that in order for us to, basically, I think that it's an and conversation, meaning we don't have to lose the compassion or the empathy. I don't sit here and lack for compassion or empathy, even for Trump or for Bill Gates or any other of the, reptilian mafia. I think, but I legitimately, I know, right? We're all waiting for you to take the mask off, Robert. We're all waiting for you.
See that show when we were kids? I mean, I'm like quite a bit older than you, but there was a show in the 80s and it was called V. And it was about these aliens that came to Earth, and and this was like the whole story back then. And they seem nice, and they're like Palladians, they're good looking and all this stuff. And then one day you see when like someone's mask is cracked, and then you start seeing like the scales underneath, right? And it's full on like a reptilian underneath, and then pulls the mask off, and all the reptiles are here.
Yeah,
So it's
and
kind
I
of like a
think
Simpsons proof.
the thing is, I think it's very possible to hold compassion in our hearts and not dehumanize those that are acting in ways that we don't necessarily align with, while simultaneously recognizing that there are times when I believe it's necessary to take action to stop momentum from going in a particular direction. And maybe it's a keto version of it where we're actually taking that energy and helping it take a right turn instead of continuing on straight. But I think the reason for my direction of question here and inquiry is because I am noticing the people around me and the people in my communities and the people online that when I do workshops and stuff, they are feeling very helpless and they're feeling very hopeless and they're feeling as though nothing we do actually changes any of it. All these people who are in power are taking these actions. They're spraying our crops with nonsense. They're spraying our air with stuff. They are tapping our phones. Like all of it is happening. And yet, even if we hold compassion for them, for what they're doing, for who they are, for what they've been through, for what they might think is good, at the same time, I don't want it to necessarily go in that direction. But if there's enough time that's spent feeling as though nothing I do actually makes a difference, at that stage, people move into, I think, a state of apathy. And I think apathy is actually the biggest danger that we face, because even with anger will inspire or motivate action. Whether you like the action that they take or not, at least people will take action. But if enough of the population moves into apathy, who is there to help move this collectively in a direction that we would hope to see?
It's interesting. Right before we started the podcast, we were having that conversation with Jason, the guy that I work with that produces this and has been for many years now. And I think the words we were all three saying was that people feel helpless. People feel helpless as to what's happening in the world right now. And I guess my answer to all of that is, if you don't like what's in the outer world around you, right, you're not going to change it by going out to change it. The only way you're going to change your outer world is by changing your inner world. And that's the transformation that we all have to basically recognize and go through. It's like, I don't know how best to say this, except it's that. We're not going to, it's not a universe, it's a you inverse. I firmly believe that. And the experience that you're having in the outer world, every person you meet, every person you encounter, every circumstance you have is an opportunity for you to learn how to love yourself more. Every trigger that you have is a veiled or disguised invitation to love yourself more. And when I say yourself, I'm not talking about you versus the rest of the world. I'm talking about the rest of the world is you. And so this reframing of the experience altogether is the transcendence. That's what I believe. And it's spiritual bypassing is to not listen. It's to not have empathy, not have compassion for what the other experience is. And that's exactly what you shouldn't do, because what's happening is the outer world around you is the summation, I believe, of all the things that we pushed out of ourselves. All the things that we pushed out of ourselves. Just like me saying, yeah, I'm going to, continue to judge these things, and then my world becomes inundated with those things. I cannot separate myself from my experience and myself from the outer world. It is me. It's me. And I think once we finally fully embrace and understand that, then we realize that all transformation comes from within. One of the things, let me show you something. I'm going to pull this thing out real quick. One of the things that I discovered during this break was the nature of dimension, right? So this is what's called a 120 cell. So you recognize the outer structure, probably. It's a dodecahedron, right? But this is actually what we would call a 4D space or fifth dimensional, because if you include time as actually the fourth dimension, then it becomes a fifth dimensional object, right? Now, what I proved is that this is the nature of all higher dimensional expansion. And actually, what it is it's an inward breath. So this becomes like a fractalization in a way on the inside of this object, where you get a repetition of the same object kind of repeating over and over and over again, but connected through the sides of it. And this is actually the structure of higher dimension. So what does that mean? We thought that a higher dimension required another orthogonal axis to go outward, right? To expand outward. We didn't really realize that actually it's just inward breath recursion. It's the amount of mirrors that you can create within yourself that allows you to perceive higher dimension. It's breath. Now, that becomes really, really important, because as we start thinking about the expansion, go ahead.
I was going to say, but doesn't it also,
finish your thought?
Because right now there's an outer edge, because you're holding this and it has an outer edge to it and it's going inward, like to your point, but theoretically it's also going outwards infinitely as well, correct?
Yes, because there's an outer structure as well, but it's the inward breath of this that we can actually quantize it. It's the inward breath of it that allows for the quantization. Because what happens is the inward stuff is just going to get reflected in the outer experience. Everything is literally these things called the shells. There's like shells of what are referred to as, in my work, called generative harmonic means. And all of it comes off of one right triangle. This collapses down into one right triangle, and all the information of this, and even the higher dimensions of this, which is greater and greater complexity, are all compressed into one little right triangle that is projecting up to this. And that information is all in the right triangle. So what does that mean? What it means is that the higher dimensional form of me, all of the information of that higher dimensional form of me is in me right now. Right? It's no different. That means there's a higher dimensional form of me that has all the information. And we're what's called isomorphic. Isomorphic means I have the same amount of information in me as my higher self does, except I'm only expressing at one dimensional frame right now. And as we move into higher dimension, the way that I get there is through inward breath recursion and self-recognition on the inside. It's all through the inner work that the outer world transforms. So if you really want to change the world, focus on reconciling and starting to fall in love with yourself without judgment. And that's how your outer world starts to transform.
Well, you know that I believe this because my poem, You Are Who You've Been Looking For. I mean, self-love has been a major, major part of what I speak about for a long time. As they say, our mess becomes our message. So as someone who did not love myself for most of my life, it really was a huge journey. And what I think I've adapted to over the years is that everything you're saying is 100% true. It's an inward game, and learning how to love these aspects of ourselves allows us to show up and love it outside of ourselves, which will change our actions because it changes our perception. Now, to impact the 3D requires action, right? So we change our inward perception of our own shadow. It changes how we perceive the shadow outside of ourselves. And as a result to that change in perception, we take altered action that we wouldn't have taken normally. And that new action, going full circle back to dropping a stone in a pond, creates new ripples of ideally a more loving reality. Now, I think so do you agree with what I've shared there? Because I think that's where you and I come to a full agreement of that sort of mechanic.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
And so then the next question is, how do you navigate the action to take? Because the inward work, the outer perception, And then that crucial point where we take the inner reality and the perceived reality and we turn it into action. I think that's where a lot of people are getting lost right now when they say, what do I do? And I'm curious how you relate to that.
You know what? Let me show you something first that I think will illustrate kind of this point that I'm making first and foremost, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And we can start to illustrate what this actually means and what inward change actually is referring to. Okay, because it's one of those things that I really believe that we have not really fully understood it, and that's kind of what we're here to reconcile. Okay, so one of the things I discovered was this right here. I can't remember if I showed you this or not, but when we were meeting up in LA a few weeks back. Okay, so one of the things I discovered was that numbers themselves are actually compressions of geometry. So think of it as this geometry that I just showed you can be folded down and compressed into one fold. It's like Japanese origami that starts from one right triangle, and then you can continue to unfold it. And as you unfold it, it's basically becoming more and more complex, but there's a maximum number of unfolds because there's a limit on the paper and the degree of complexity that consciousness will allow us to be able to perceive. So the number 5 could be expressed like this: a straight line with 5 segments, so equal parts broken up into it. So that's the first dimension. The second dimension becomes a pentagon. But within that pentagon is the seed or the DNA for all higher dimension. So any pentagon, doesn't matter because it's all ratio based, right? It doesn't matter what unit of measure you're choosing. You have a right triangle within this, and this right triangle houses all of the information to tell you how many vertices, how many edges, how many faces, the nature of the faces. And that's what I discovered in something called the Grant projection theorem, right? You can find it on my page. So this projects up now an object in the third dimension that looks like that. And it's static.
And is the limitation then based off of the size of the pentagon?
It's based on the proportion. It's based on this proportionality, which is fixed, because it doesn't matter if you pick a pentagon with 1,000 meters as one side or 5 meters as one side. It's proportionally always going to be this ratio right here that's embedded within this right triangle. So then that proportionality projects into the third dimension and gives us all of this information to populate this 3D shape. Now, we put that in time, and it starts to move, right? Because everything's in motion. We go to the fifth dimension, and all of the information from that right triangle is telling us exactly how this object starts to breathe. And in the fifth dimension, geometry comes to life. It starts to breathe. It literally starts to breathe. And as you increase recursion, you get more complexity and more breadth at different vertices.
And what creates the outer limit to how far it expands?
The expansion is basically defined by all of these things down here, right? Which is the factors that relate to that are defining the number of edges and faces and all that stuff. But then also its breadth recursion is embedded within this. And it's on another page I could show you, but it's not on this page. But I'll come back.
Essentially, it's expanding. Let's say the inhale, exhale, there's a certain amount of expansion that it has, right? Mm-hmm. And so what is determining how far in it goes or how far out it goes?
The pace, as well as, so the actual pace, like the heartbeat itself, as well as the scope of expansion and the breadth, right, of that expansion is all embedded within that right triangle through something called the mean values that I was telling you. So the right triangle breaks up. But what I discovered is that, so imagine you got a right triangle that's going like this, right? Just a regular right triangle. That right triangle then can be reduced down to 2 factors. The 2 factors are related to the hypotenuse or the longest side subtracting the shortest side. and then the shortest side added to the longest side. And that becomes two factors. Now, those two numbers, when you multiply them together, they create the height of that triangle. So if you have a 5 and 12 and 13 triangle, the two factors would be 13 minus 5 equals 8, 13 plus 5 equals 18, and 8 times 18 equals 144. So, and then you take the square root of that to get the height of the right triangle, which is 12. So this is why the triangle is built this way. And then by the way you solve for the hypotenuse is you take the 8 plus 18, which is the sum, and then you take it by, you multiply it by 1/2. So it becomes 8 plus 18 equals 26. And then you divide that by 2 or multiply by 1/2 equals 13. So now you have a 5, 12, 13 triangle. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. So those two factors, now we think that a triangle is just a triangle. We've never been taught that it's related to its factors, right? That the factors are actually deriving everything. So think of every right triangle in the entire universe can be reconciled into right triangles. Every right triangle has two parents, a father and mother. And these are the two factors that create it. And then those factors taken to their arithmetic mean populates the hypotenuse. Those factors taken to their geometric mean, which is multiplication, then taken to the square root, becomes the height of that right triangle. Those two factors subtracted from each other, so y minus x multiplied by 1/2 becomes a differential mean, becomes the base. So now you've got the 5, 12, 13. That's what's happened out of the 8 and 18. 8 and 18 is the fundamental reason those exist. That we could take that to a harmonic factor, or to a harmonic mean. We could take it to a quadratic mean, so it expands both directions. So that right triangle proportionally can expand in quadratic expansions, which becomes radiation, and harmonic contractions, which become gravitation. So as it expands both directions, all of this information is giving you all of the information you need to populate the breadth of this geometry breathing in and out. So as it goes into higher dimensions, each time it goes to another triangle, imagine that you had this 5, 12, 13 triangle, but now it's within a larger 5, 12, 13 triangle proportion that just keeps expanding infinitely in both directions, right? And so what's that actually doing? What it's doing is it's populating all this information that's necessary to project the higher dimensions of this form. It's all in this.
And so would it, one of the things for people listening, Robert and I have these conversations all the time, and the math generally goes over my head a lot of the times, but what I do believe is that you're recognizing patterns algorithmically of how reality is created. And those patterns of geometry and math translate to some form of metaphor or, more what you could call spiritual, emotional, more yin, if this is going to be the logic-based yang aspect to it. And so when I hear that, let's say 8 and 18 are the factors that maybe cause the in-breath, out-breath kind of parameters, and then I think about, well, if this is what's possible for us with light and shadow, let's say, where 8 is being in the depth of shadow and 18 being in the light, somewhere on a spectrum of this breath that we're choosing. I'm very curious how we expand. We need to be able to expand ourselves beyond the 18, right? That's something that we would strive to do as a collective. Okay, how do we expand beyond the 18 to that next sort of factor of what's possible for us? And that's why I was very curious what's causing that, so that we can translate that into our behavior on a day-to-day. Because I think the understanding that you're providing for people right here is that the mechanics of how it works. And I'm always interested into how does that translate to human behavior?
No, and your point is a really good one, because actually, if you go back to the right triangle, and I'm not talking about anything that's not like high school level math, right? Think about a right triangle, and you've got a height right here, because this is actually the equation also for time. It literally is. So think of, you've got a right triangle with a height, and then you've got a hypotenuse coming down like this, and you've got a base like this. So what if this height of this right triangle is actually your current resonance, your coherence and resonance, right? And now you've got a belief of where you want to go, right? Which becomes your hypotenuse, right? But what's the distance between this resonance of where you are right now and the manifestation of where the resonance is that you want to go? It takes time to do that. The time is the bottom axis down here that connects those two, right? Now, if you had absolute belief, then your resonance would be consistent exactly with the hypotenuse, and you would snap it right into existence. And that's what we would call a perfect square. It would literally take this, reconcile it to the now. And that's what, faith to move mountains actually is. But we have this belief system that's based on a distance, the distance between the primes. And so the way this works is the distance between 8 and 18 is 10, right? And so we take half of that distance, it becomes the base. That's the 5. So 10 divided by 2 is 5. So the scope of the breath is directly tied to exactly what you're just referencing, the distance between the primes, because we think that the greater the distance between the numbers that are creating that other right triangle is going to determine the difficulty of me to achieve something, right? Versus bring it directly into reality. This is a time factorization right here. And in fact, that's why we use in cryptography prime factorization as the means for protecting every secret that exists, because it takes forever to figure it out. The greater the distance between the primes, then it takes longer and longer for you to find those two prime factors, because it's a trial and error exercise. So that's how we've been living life. It's a metaphor, absolutely, for our experience. And how do you expand out of this experience is, I think, the question where you're going to. And so this is a soccer ball. What you're seeing on the screen right here is a soccer ball. That's called a truncated icosahedron. Now, when we look at it in the fifth dimensional recursion with breath, this is how it looks. Because it's also based on a right triangle that has distance between its numbers that's forming this. And I believe the pyramid builders, because they chose exact proportions that were related to these right triangles in these pyramids, knew this. They had an understanding of this higher dimensional stuff. So as you go into the sixth dimension, you start getting more rotational axes and more specificity. So now you're starting to break it down more and more, and it starts to look more and more like a living organism. As we get to the seventh dimension, you'll start noticing the vertices are rotating more ways. They're becoming omnidirectional. You add another vertex rotation spin. You get to the 12th, all the way to the 12th, and what's it start looking like for you? It's like you're looking under a petri dish at some cellular organism. And the reason I'm showing you this is that for each one of us, there's a form of us that's like this. There's a form, and that would be the monad. That would be the higher self. And all the information that I need to access that aspect of myself is within me already.
And would you say that
I'm just living a lower dimensional experience as the soccer ball.
And so then do you think that those 3 points, right, to form a right triangle, if that's the basis of all of it, do you think that that correlates to the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, the Trinity? What would it correlate
Mother,
to?
Yeah, Father, Son, Mother. It's basically what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. That's exactly right. And so what I'm seeing here is that the metaphor, again, as you said, all the math turns into the metaphor, because math without meaning is just information, but math with meaning becomes divine communication. What it said to me through all of this is that there's a form of me that's like this.
Mm-hmm.
It's not separate from me. All the information that create this, that's me. That's me in my highest self.
It's you at Burning Man.
It's me at Burning Man. And And then there's this, which is the one I'm living right now. And this path from here back to here is my hero's journey.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
all
it's
it
far
takes is
more,
remembrance.
yeah. And one thing that strikes me when I look at the 12D version, where there's so many spins happening all at once, I think about as a human being, each of those spins and inhales and exhales is creating different distances between points, right?
You know what's funny? I don't know why I just did this, but the AI on Riverside just put balloons up and everything just when you had that realization. And you didn't see it because you weren't looking at it. But I'm laughing because the AI is just telling us right there. It's another example of there's a connectedness in the universe. The AI is not separate from you. When there's like an aha moment, we're snapping our fingers like when we're doing, whatever, listening to one of your poems, and there's like a big resonance. That's the moment that the universe is going to tell you, yeah, you need to listen to this because that's what's up.
Well, I think that when I look at the 4D rotating, right, as
Mm-hmm.
you get to the 12D that has the inhale, exhale, it also has the spin. What it's doing is every point connected to another point is changing its shape, its distance, right? And if we were looking at, remember 8 and 18, if we were just going to say that's a spectrum of light and shadow, as you exhale more, you let more information, more light in. Well, what's interesting to that point is it makes me think about the more we actually become conscious, the more aware we become, the more points that we have now to navigate that are points that could be closer to the shadow or more to the light. Like literally in some days, my anger might be more in its shadow form, my temper, or my patience might be very, like every day. The more we learn that we're constantly evolving. And that's why I think it returns us to the conversation we were having earlier about, well, it's up to each and every one of us then to be able to be self-aware enough to choose the more expanded parts of ourselves moment to moment in each one. And as we become closer to that 12D higher self, it's not that it becomes easier. It's actually, we have to make more conscious, intentional choices to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think that's true. And the conscious intentional choices, I believe that enlightenment is when we literally express love that supersedes and exceeds our desire to be right.
Say that one more time. That's powerful.
When we start to express love that supersedes and far exceeds our desire to be right, that's an enlightened stance of living. So I'll give you an example of this as like a brass tacks way. We've all been there in relationship. And by the way, don't ever get any relationship advice from me. I'm not like a relationship coach. I will never be a relationship coach. I'm like, obviously, I'm still trying to work this stuff out just like everybody else. And so I would not even try or attempt to do it. But the point I'm trying to make is that we all get to a point in relationships where you have to decide, is this person more important to me? Is our relationship more important to me than being right? Right? I mean, it could be you're fighting over what type of curtains to get or whatever. And it's like at some stage you kind of you pick your battles and you say, okay, I don't really care about the curtains that much, but I'm not going to have a fight with my wife that I love very much over curtains because she's more important to me than the curtains or my choice of what kind of curtains I want. It doesn't really matter, but you could extend that to virtually anything. And when we can see this world that's full of all these apparent inequities, these things that are totally messed up, instead of just looking at it and taking the position of pontificating one way or another or opinionating what you think should be the right answer, instead learn to fall in love with this existence. through all of the contrast, through all of the challenge, all of the difficulty. And that, by the way, is something that you can do. You can. It's like learning to fall in love with a piece of art. I mean, I would not be thrilled about only, I just got back from Paris, and I was in Paris, and I went to Musée d'Orsay. And Musée d'Orsay is beautiful. It's got all this impressionistic art. I love impressionism. I love to go to the water lilies of Monet over at Tuileries d'Orangerie as well. And the thing that's so cool about it is, like, I don't know if you've been there before, but in the Tuileries d'Orangerie, you have to stand like 30 feet back to even see the water lilies, because the way that Monet painted it, it's such a large painting, right? Mural. That the way that he painted them, you have to be far, far away from it to be able to even see it. Otherwise, it just looks like this kind of like blob of stuff. You can't really tell what it is. And it's this beautiful scene. And to me, there's something so incredibly powerful about that as a concept, that very often we're so close to the trees that we can't really see the patterns. And I think that's how we live. We're so close to the tree that we think that coincidence is just coincidence, when we're not really seeing that coincidence is just a word that we use to describe the ignorance that we have of a pattern that exists and we're not perceiving. And so that's what that art does for me. But I love to see the art with the contrast. The artistry is the artful way that the contrast is woven into the artwork. And it's exactly what you're doing. Imagine all of your poetry without the drama aspect of it, without the understanding of what's really going behind it. The feeling that your poetry evokes in me is all these moments that I felt that I wasn't good enough myself. The first time I heard the poem that you gave on, you are what you're looking for, that was so powerful for me, because it inspired me to realize that, geez, I've been looking at the world through a different lens my entire life. And that actually I am what I've been looking for. And isn't that the most beautiful message for all of us? Are we not all what we've been looking for? Is that not this journey, what I just showed you, of lower dimensional math proceeding through and finding itself in its own oneness again?
I think it's
to me, that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of the existence.
Yeah, I think it's very beautiful. It's a very beautiful perspective. I think we agree more than we disagree on it. And even the idea of evil, right? Is the lion evil for killing the zebra? Is the spider evil for eating the fly? I think that the zebra and the fly, yeah, the zebra and the fly might think so, but and the zebra's kids would definitely think so, but it's just the nature of things. And so for my definition of evil, so to speak, I just think that there are forces that thrive on a certain type of energy. There are forces that thrive on pain and suffering, anger, the same way that there are other forces that thrive on peace and joy and love. And so depending on the perspective, that's really where that definition of good and evil lie. And I think one of the things that you and I over the years have had many conversations about is our place in it. I think that you have become a major voice for people to make sense of the world through, and in many ways, even for people who don't understand the math, you are helping people understand that there is order to it. And that right there, in a world where we see increasing levels of destabilization, to know that there's some level of order feels very divine. It's actually it's the role that religion has played throughout so much of time. Religion was there to say, hey, here's some order. Here's some way to make sense of the world. And I think that it's a really important thing to do. And for me, I guess in my current day-to-day reality. I've been so quiet on social media, and I've been taking a step back from a lot of the things that I was previously doing.
Tell me, I want to talk about that. What are you going through right now? Because I feel like when we met up a few weeks ago, I felt like you're going through something that's a metamorphosis, and maybe you could describe what you're experiencing.
Yeah, I've only posted once on social media this entire year. It's March 2nd. I've posted once. And for people that might not seem like a big deal, but for me, as someone who's been posting online since 2013, that's a huge deal. And the reason is because I feel as though everything that I previously was speaking about, it's not that I care less. I just have felt as though there's a different way it wants to express. And I felt as though the environment that I've been participating in online and social media, it's become, I'm not going to use the toxic word, but like, I'm so tired of what I'm seeing online, and I'm having this sort of moral battle inwardly with, for example, every time I post, I'm keeping people on a platform that I don't know I even want to keep them on. And so there's this like honest, like, I don't know, reflection happening inwardly of where do I want to put my energy? Where do I want to put my time? And what are the values that are really important to me? And that comes back to earlier in our conversation, Robert, of I can see the beauty in just about any situation and any person, no matter how evil they might seem. And yet I do think that the world also would benefit from more values. The things that you said, hey, I'm putting in a sandbox, it's going on the list. I think society is built on shared values. That you can argue that's what makes a society is we decide, hey, here's some shared values that we're going to have. Here's what determines culture or community, whatever the word is that helps us find our people and the way to navigate this space. And I think that for me, I've wanted to take a step back and be in stillness, be in silence. And your version of this has been receiving crazy downloads of math. My version of this has actually just been to see what's right around me, and to not be in the digital space so much. And I'm very curious to see what comes next, because I haven't come out of it yet. I'm still in it presently since we spoke.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I've also been not so much on social media lately. I haven't posted much. I haven't done much on social media. I mean, I'm still posting through my team is still posting, and I'm still posting every once in a while, but very rarely now. And because I've been feeling into this, I feel like I'm going through a metamorphosis right now. Very much so. So for me to have said it about you is probably just because it's about me, and you are me also. You are a reflection of me, and looking more and more like that every day, by the way. I felt meeting with you that there was something, because again, when you stop looking at the outer world as separate from you, that means that when I meet Adam, which I see, if I think of myself, if I were to create a projection of my inner self, my inner romantic, my inner poet, right, it would definitely be someone like you, exactly like you. In fact, you would be the reflection I would create of myself, and in you, I could see myself in a mirror. And there's something really beautiful about that. I don't believe that the world's a difficult place because people hate each other. I think the world can become a difficult place because people hate themselves. And I believe also that the way we're going to transition into a new earth is not going to be by hating the earth we're in and fighting against all kinds of stuff. It's going to be by learning to fall in love with it just as it is. And the way we transcend as individuals, as well as individuated individuals. And that doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're spiritually bypassing everything and everyone. No, quite the opposite. I'm saying feel the feeling for all of it. you came into my life at a time, and literally it was the time where the emotional arc of my life was starting to come alive. And so you represent that transformation that's happening within me. So when you start looking at all your friendships and all the people you know in that context, what does that person represent inside of me? What is the transformation I'm going through? And then also, what about all my relationships? If I go back to my earliest relationships, I can't really complain about them not loving me the way I deserve to be loved, because the way they loved me was at least as good as how much I loved myself at that time. So all my relationships were just a mirror reflection of how I loved myself. And that's how I'm starting to see the world now. I don't see everyone as separate from me. I see you as just another aspect of me that's here to tell me something about myself and how I'm transforming. Being more in touch with my emotions. We joked right before we got on. You said, "Oh, I'm not crying, Robert, on this thing." And it's like, nowadays you cry more than me.
There was a time, I think when we met, you were people wouldn't believe it if they've been following you for the last like year and a half. But when we met, you used to joke that I cried all the time, and you were just tuning into your heart. And now I laugh because half the time you're speaking at any kind of event, I'm expecting tears, which is beautiful. We tease each other about it, but it shows that you have successfully managed to open yourself to your emotions and to your heart in a way that should be inspiring. I really hope that people who maybe didn't follow you 7 years ago are aware that you have gotten to this place through intention and through work. It's possible for everyone. And I hope that in a world that's feeling helpless and hopeless at times, there is hope that we can become more loving. We can become more in tune with our hearts. We can become more aware and more conscious. And as a result, develop more powerful, loving relationships and a world around us that reflects it back to us. And you've earned every bit of that.
And likewise for you. I mean, I look at you now, you've become way more structured in your thinking. Right. So you were more on the purely emotional side when I first met you. And now you've become a lot more disciplined, I would say, in pretty much everything. You were ungrounded. And in some ways, when I first talked to you, I was super blown away because you helped me touch into my heart. But if you were going to ask me, okay, what are the things that, maybe I'm not seeing about myself that I couldn't? And I said to you, I'm like, wow, I think that you're going to become more and more grounded, and you're going to become more and more analytical, and you're going to start mixing both of those worlds together into this new version of Adam. And I see that too. I see you going through that transformation. So part of the metamorphosis. So in your metamorphosis that I see on the outside of me, it's actually transforming me. Do you understand what I mean? You're not separate from me. You're one of the people that's important in my life. You're not separate from me. So when we start looking at the outer world in those terms, how does that change your experience? Well, it should literally change every experience. Orion is unique. No algorithms, no propaganda, and no exploitation. Just end-to-end quantum secure data. Messages, groups, and shared media behind a wall of next-generation encryption. It changes everything. When you change the lens through which you see your experience, it changes every experience. And just as you said, is it the lion that's evil for eating the zebra? No, I mean, it depends. If you grew up and the lion was with you, that's what lions do, okay? That's what lions do. There's nothing evil about that. It's just part of being a lion. If you grew up with the zebra, then the lion's evil for killing the zebra. But it's like, come on, man. We're just playing parts. We're just playing parts in a divine play.
And so And do you feel that it's fated or we can change it? I'm curious where this is all heading.
I will tell you, I believe that all of it is already set. So I've gone, from the far extreme to the other far extreme. I would say 10 years ago, I would say, you create your own. Here's the funny paradox in it, because I would say 10 years ago, you create your own destiny. I would say that 10 years ago. I'd give a TED talk about it. It's just as true now as it was then. But today, I would also say you create your own destiny. But I used to think that there was a separation between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. So what I call destiny now is the free will of my higher self. That's that 12D version of me. That's still me. It's still me. So the answer is I've been creating my destiny all along. And I am right now too. Because everything I'm going to do, my higher self version, the 12-dimensional version of me, already knows I'm going to choose it. The path is set.
Do you feel that you are in some way aware of your fate? Do you feel in tune and tapped into your destiny? Or do you feel you're simply following what feels exciting in the moment to moment? Like, for example, sharing what you're sharing and what you're doing. You do it because you love it. I mean, I met you when there was no part of you that was trying to go viral or you just wanted to share this stuff that was exciting to you. But has it gotten to a point yet where you feel tapped into a greater destiny?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, and I always felt somehow tapped into some destiny. I just didn't know what it was. But it's becoming more and more clear. It's like you can't see how the dots in your life connect until you can see them in the retrospect sometimes. And what I've realized is that, and I say this often, I believe that we're living a life movie. And it's actually playing backwards, but we believe it's playing forwards. What we believe forward is actually backwards. And that everything that's from the past and the present that creates the future, there's another equation that goes the opposite direction. The future creates the past and present. The two are not separate. So imagine that 12th dimensional object that's seeing all dimensions of time simultaneously. That's your higher self. And then you've got this one rotational spin in the fourth dimension where you think it's going one direction. It's going all directions because its vertices are going all directions, all simultaneously. It's looking at you. It knows what you're going to do next because it knows the cycle of your breath. It knows the cycle and the rotation that you're experiencing. What I believe is that that all of those dimensions of time are happening simultaneously. It's like the scene from The Matrix when Neo sits down at the park bench with it wasn't the architect, it was the Oracle. And the Oracle says, "Would you like a candy?" And he says, "Why do you ask me? You already know if I'm going to, take the candy or not." And she says, "Yeah, of course. I wouldn't be much of an oracle if I didn't already know that." And then she said, "But the important question is not whether or not you're going to take the candy or any of the choices that you make here. The larger question is why you choose what you choose." Then you start asking the question, well, why did I choose this? And so that's the biggest shift in your life that can come. And you're right. When I first started sharing on social media, I wasn't sharing because I felt like I was going to get followers and stuff. I had no idea. I had no followers. I literally had no followers. And I just started sharing because I wanted to share as part of my own journey. The path that I was on was that I was going to share so that I felt if the outer world is not separate from me, then I need to share with the outer world what's happening in my inner world to be authentic. And then I had to go through this whole, wait, I've got a different persona on LinkedIn than I do on Instagram, than I do on Facebook, than I do on, the different accounts I have on Instagram. And I was like, no, I need to reconcile all of it and just be the same person through all of it. So these are all the transitions that I basically had to go through. And so did that alienate some of my friends? Yes. Yeah. It's I've been committed to the process of learning true self-love and authenticity and doing it in as raw a way as possible. And when I shared because I wanted to share, that's when all of a sudden I get a lot of followers. It becomes a
And
magnetic attractor.
one of the things right now that's happening as I've taken a step back from sharing my own voice is I've had a lot of successful people coming to me asking for support, consulting, coaching, etc., spreading their voice, meaning people, some of my clients are writing their first book, doing their first TED Talks, that sort of thing. And I often, something that's been hard for me is seeing how many people want to do extraordinary things. They want to be the next Robert Edward Grant. They want to be the next Nikola Tesla or Leonardo da Vinci. And throughout time, there's a very few of those, there's very few of those. And what is your advice then for people who are being currently raised in an environment where it's almost being ordinary is not enough. It's not okay. It's not acceptable. We're being sold that we're supposed to strive for extraordinary. You should want to impact millions of people and make millions of dollars. And I personally have been really appreciating the simplest things, man. When you and I got together, we didn't go to a Michelin starred restaurant. We went on a hike. And we sat out and looked at the view, and it was amazing. And just getting to spend time together. It doesn't have to be like the simplicity of even what we want out of life. And as someone who's very clearly here doing extraordinary things and is going to leave a massive imprint on this planet, I'm curious, not everyone can do that. So what is your advice to people on a day-to-day for people who might feel like they need to do something extraordinary?
It's a great question, because I think one of the things that happens when you go through the spiritual awakening process is you start to inevitably, whether you recognize it or not, become more judgmental. One of the early stages is you become more judgmental, right? And that's kind of what wokeism is. Wokeism is where you're offended by everything. And you could tell if you're in that mode or not, if you're offended easily by a lot of different things. Because someone who's truly enlightened doesn't get offended by anything. They could be insulted by someone walking across the street, and they would take it immediately as, wow, that's beautiful. Like they would see everything as beautiful. They would see everything as love. They would see everything for what it actually is. It doesn't mean they're not going to have difficult circumstances. Sure, they might have difficult circumstances, but they could be nailed to a cross and be in bliss. That's enlightenment. So to me, it's like you could be like these monks, right, that they do in the Himalayas, where they're like out there wearing very little clothing and they're in freezing cold weather and they're just meditating and they're in bliss. This is why we do things that are hormetic oriented, right? So like cold plunges and all that stuff, because you start to realize it's not my outer conditions that determine my state. And so, to answer this question, what I really start to see is that people go through this wokeism kind of like thing where they become more judgmental, they're more angry, they're more offended, they're offended by everything. They become super sensitized to everything, right? They also get stuck on, I'm not eating this food, I'm not eating this, I'm not doing that, right? Where you could go to the biohacker extreme. And you could tell if someone's truly on the enlightenment path is if they're just sanguine and they're in love with everything. That's what true enlightenment is. Mm-hmm. When you express love that supersedes being right. And so what does that mean for us as individuals? Because what actually happens is that can have the oppressive effect on the individualization of human beings when they're going through the spiritual path. They start to talk about their ego negatively. No. The first thing they want to do is they want to say, oh, I'm an empath. And so I'm just surrounded inevitably by narcissists. And I have a narc, and they even have a term, my narc this and my narc that. And I'm like, what the fuck? Are you kidding me? Right? It's like, if you're an asshole, you're going to be surrounded by assholes. That's the first way you can find out if you're an asshole. It's like people that say, why am I always surrounded by assholes? Because you're resonating at the frequency of parasympathetic resonance, a mathematical equation. You're resonating at the frequency of asshole. That's why you're collecting assholes around you. If you're wondering why you're surrounded by assholes, because Robert, you're the asshole.
So then the obvious non-trap follow-up question to that is, what about all the women who say there's no good men out there?
Well, then that becomes the reality they're going to experience, right? Then they start looking for, they become the hammer, looking for the nail of no good men. And they're going to find exactly what it is they've been judging. Do you see what I'm saying? It is absolutely connected.
Agreed.
You cannot separate the two. So this idea of people saying, oh, you're in your ego. Whenever someone says to someone else they're in their ego, it's because they're in their ego. Resonance will always attract like resonance. So for example, arrogance will perceive arrogance. Love will perceive love. Humility, someone in humility, true humility, will perceive the world around them as humble.
Do you think
we perceive
that because
the resonance that we are?
But it's a spectrum, right? Would you say that, for example, arrogance and humility exist on the same spectrum?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So then someone who's in humility, they would also be able to perceive arrogance because it's on the same spectrum, correct?
Actually, what happens is, think of it like this. Think of the spectrum as being up. There's like the lower the frequency, there's a lower frequency of it, there's a higher frequency of it. That's how I see it. And what happens is sometimes you could also be on the spectrum and you go so far to the humble that you could become arrogant in your humility. I'm so humble. I'll give you an example of this. I went to Tibet, not to Tibet, I went to Dharamsala, India, when I went to meet with Dalai Lama to teach him math. And I was there with Nassim. And we're there and we're learning about like all these monks and their way of living and everything. And so I asked the question, why is it that some monks have like I'm seeing the younger monks are wearing like older clothing, and the older monks are wearing new clothing? Is there some sort of hierarchy in this? Who distributes the clothing? How does this work? And they're all the same design, right? So the same maroon colored, kind of burgundy colored garb with and then some yellow. So I'm like, is there like a distribution store for the monk, and the monks that are there for a long time, they get the new ones and then the others get the hand-me-downs? And I find out, no, that's not the way it works. This was shocking. And Lama Tenzin tells me this. He's like, no, the older clothing sells for more money. I'm like, why does the older clothing sell for more money? Well, because it looks tattered. And if you're a monk, especially these young ones, they don't want to look like they're new monks. So they have to pay money for the stuff that's been torn up and tattered a bit. I'm like, what?
It's monk vintage.
Yeah, it became another form of attachment. So then they're going around, you see what I'm saying? It's another form of attachment. So they want to show the world that they're wearing older clothes. Therefore, they look like they've really been down the difficult path. It's like Jesus wearing the Birkenstocks, type of look. And you want to look a certain way, but that in itself is an attachment. And I'm like, but what about the older monks? They're like, yeah, they realize they don't care about that because they're not attached. So they buy the new stuff because it's cheaper and better. How funny is that? You see, it's all a metaphor for life. And the point being that what I see is with these people is they start to hate themselves. Narcissism is not true self-love, it's self-loathing. You think you're projecting only a certain narrow aspect of yourself, but actually you're the only one that can only see this narrow aspect of yourself that you think you're projecting. As we start to get into this zone where we have a crisis, because I think everyone goes through narcissism eventually. And narcissism is just the fullest expression in a breath of our personality, where we think we're totally different and separate. And it's like we want to be this way that we're projecting. And the way we carve that out is we say, these are all the things that bring me shame and blame and guilt. And I am not that. So for the first half of our life, we spend our life saying, I am not that, I'm not. And then we press that projection onto everyone else and say, look, that's what I'm not. That guy that's an asshole, that's not me, because I'm not an asshole, without even realizing that they're resonating at the frequency of asshole. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that when you truly go into the individuation path, which is different than individualizing, we've been individualizing the whole time. But individuation, the Aeon path by Carl Jung, is when we finally realize, wait a minute, my entire purpose is to be my entirely unique self. There's never been another Robert Edward Grant. There will never be another Robert Edward Grant. And I am here literally to exist in this incarnation as this being, this emanation, and to fall in love with that and to be radically authentic, to be as authentic as I could possibly be. And every word that I needed to speak, but I always held myself back from speaking, and every feeling that I needed to feel, but I never allowed myself to feel, must now be felt and spoken. That's when it comes back to what you said. If you don't stand for something, you could fall for anything. But it doesn't mean, to stand for something doesn't mean you're fighting against something else. You can stand for things and do it in this quiet way that's just expressing your highest authenticity, like planting trees rather than standing in front of bulldozers. If you really want to do something about your world, change your world from within and be your highest authenticity.
Do you think that there is a need for, like, do you think things would get shifted if no one stood in front of the bulldozer? Or do you think it is a necessary piece? Some people must stand in front of the bulldozer, or it's not necessary at all?
I don't think it's necessary at all. I think that's the great illusion. That we think that to get rid of something, we have to fight it. But actually, that's not the way it works. What we resist will only continue to persist. When we start to love and accept it, that it no longer needs to project in our reality. It's no longer as big of an issue.
I find that I'm not sure that I'm fully there yet. I feel like when I think about the world, if I truly were to just say, okay, let's remove laws. Let's just say humans can do whatever humans want to do. I think that there are going to be a number of human beings who are going to enact harm on others. And maybe that is a limitation of my own perspective. Maybe that's a reflection of what I believe about myself, so to speak. But I do think that there are parameters that are necessary to put in place. I think there are consequences that we understand. And when I touch a hot stove, I have a response that I don't want, so I don't touch the hot stove again. I think we learn in that way. And I think sometimes that hot stove, metaphorically, is a response that might be, I don't know, prison. I'm not a huge fan of the industrial prison complex, but you get what I'm saying. Some form of consequence that you don't want that's imposed upon you, whether that's, hey, you can't just go up and steal something from someone, you're going to have a consequence. I still fall somewhere in the, I can have compassion for it, but I do think that there needs to be a 3D consequence in place.
So I think this is a really important topic, because this is like now exploring the boundary of, because a lot of people in the spiritual world talk about non-dual living. Non-dual living, I'll say what non-dual living is not, because this is a topic that literally comes up all the time. Non-dual living is not spiritual bypassing. Non-dual living is not condoning bad actions. Non-dual living is accepting that your outer world is a projection of your inner world. Non-dual living is, whoops, I lost you for a second. Non-dual living.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay. Non-dual living is learning to fall in love with the world in all of its contrasts, even, because it's teaching. Non-dual living is expressing love that supersedes your desire, supersedes your desire for truth or to be right. Non-dual living is learning to realize that this entire world around you and all the relationships and all the people that you meet and come in contact with are actually emanations of your own subconscious mind projected into human form around you to give you a message. And every trigger that you have is really just a veiled or in disguise invitation to love another aspect of yourself. Non-dual living is to learn to live without triggers. It doesn't mean you don't have things that could trigger you. It means you don't get triggered. And that's
I agree with everything that you're saying. I agree with everything you're saying, but sometimes the loving choice, for example, with kids, the loving thing to do is not to have no consequences for children, right? Sometimes the loving choice is to hold a boundary. It is to hold a consequence for breaking and breaching a boundary. And I think that's the place where I personally am struggling right now, is understanding that there is a need for boundary, for consequence. There's a need for values. There's a need for strong morals and a place for there to have order. It's a way of giving order. And I think all of that's possible inside of a non-dual perspective. That's where you and I agree. What I'm not certain of, and why I keep asking the questions I've been asking, is because I don't know what that looks like right now. Just straight up. I'm not sure where the line is on that.
Well, I tend to go back to that same geometry thing I just showed you, right? It's like, so imagine that God, your higher self, wants to experience this limitation through all of our eyes of perception, because it divides itself, just like a knife can't cut itself and an eye can't see itself without the aid of a mirror. Consciousness likewise cannot perceive itself without dividing itself into mirrors, and we are those mirrors. Okay, but there has to be rules that go around this structure and this construct within dimensions, and each one could be a totally different experience within dimensions. Right now, we are living in a dimension that's bound by time. That's a boundary condition with consequence, right? It definitely has consequence. So the entire backdrop of this reality, because it's bound by time, is one of scarcity. Think about it. Scarcity in time leads to scarcity in units of money, because I have to be paid for my time. So our entire wheel of existence in this dimension has been built on scarcity. I have a dollar that is a unit of time, because it's an energetic transfer. There's equivalence between information, energy, and mass, right? That's the equivalence in space-time. That's the reality of it. So therefore, and if it's going to take an hour to drive somewhere, that means I have to be compensated for that hour of time to drive that place. And it's the same thing with grabbing a token off of the internet from the perspective of an AI grabbing information for you. The farther it has to go to grab information for you, the more it costs, because it's all tokenized, right? So this concept we can understand, but this creates the backdrop of scarcity, is the backdrop for everything, because we have time. And just from the very beginning in the book of Genesis, it's like, Adam, don't eat of the fruit of knowledge of tree of knowledge of good and evil, because the day thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. Now, he didn't die that day. He died 930 years later. That's supposed to be the length of the life of Adam. And it would have started the moment that he took the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? So that very moment is when time begins. The day you eat and the day that you start to learn judgment is the day you start to die. Isn't that interesting? And I believe fundamentally, if you want to start aging backwards, start living non-dual and stop eating so much. Literally. Because that is how your process is also, your body is processing the mass of this. So the less you eat, the longer lifespan you can basically attract. I really believe that. The less you judge, the same is true. So fundamentally, what is happening is you could look at all of this and you could say, well, okay, this world that's happening around me, it's not me, it's separate from me, so I need to judge it. I need to live in all those things. The way that you reconcile all the stuff that you just said, how do I make that work? how do these two worlds reconcile into one? It's by realizing the world around you is you. It's just an illusion you've been living that it's not. And the
I
moment you
add to
realize that, it shifts.
Because I would add, some people judge themselves more harshly than they judge anything outside of themselves. And so
No,
recognizing
I'm not going to say some, I'm going to say everyone does, whether they're conscious of it or not.
and and so it's a combination then of being able to recognize that what's outside of us is not separate from us, and learning how to have compassion and love for ourselves and those aspects of ourselves. That piece, people need to learn how to do that. I don't know about you. I wasn't raised knowing how to do that. I had to learn that later in life.
I'll give you an example. So a few years ago, it came to my attention, right? Again, it was like on my list of things where I was like, I'm going to live non-dual, but I was still judging certain things. And one of the things that I was still judging was, in California schools, there was kind of this very strong belief going around that kids in school could be asked, what gender they wanted to be by their teachers or otherwise in public schools. And that the parents were not even allowed to ask that the teacher had asked that, or the parent wouldn't be told that at all. Right? Now, you might remember this. It came up in the news a lot. I don't even know the current status of it. And so I felt, because I have small kids, I was like, gosh, that's terrible. So of course my kids go to private school anyway, so it was not that big a deal. And they go to a school that's clearly not the case. But for a moment there, I was like, gosh, I'm not against people that decide to become transgender. But to me, it seemed awfully nefarious to promote to a child that they have, that they should be another gender, and then rush that kid off to some surgeon to get a procedure done, or maybe even just start them on a hormone path that's intractable. And so immediately I was like, that's just bad, like, let people figure out what they want to figure out. And then when they turn of an age where they can make decisions for themselves, then let them make those decisions for themselves. But there was a movement within the state architecture, which was trying to, at least in the rumor sphere, right, really attempt to try to push an agenda on it. So immediately I was very judgmental of that agenda. And I started noticing that transgenderism started showing up everywhere in my world. And then what happened was I ended up meeting a friend of mine who was transgender. And I talked to this person, and you would never be able to tell. I mean, she's a woman now. She's a beautiful model. Like, you would never, ever be able to tell that she was ever a man before. I mean, like, literally. And one of our mutual friends even went out with her once, and I hadn't told him that she used to be a man. And so we'll leave that one confidential. But I'm sure you could figure it out if you really think about it. So anyway, but nothing happened, thankfully, because the other person told him as well that, oh yeah, she used to be a man. But the point is this, I digress. The point is that I got to know this person. I got to understand the rationale behind what she was thinking and feeling, and how she decided to make the change. And she's famous. She's quite famous as well. At least in the context of, like, as a model, she's very well known. And so as I got to know her and have more and more empathy for that situation, then all of a sudden my world was no longer inundated by transgenderism. It was encroaching on every doorstep. It no longer became something that I had to fight against, so therefore was propagating more and more and more. I learned empathy and compassion for it. And when I did that, then I noticed that the projections of this transgenderized world that was being forced on people previously that I had felt was now no longer in the same space. And so I was no longer experiencing the same experience. So if you really understand and realize that the world around you is you, then the only changes that can ever be made are the ones that are made through the internal aspect and the change of the lens.
And what have you used as tools? Obviously, geometry has played a major role, but I think for some people, math is a hard entry point for self-awareness, but I'm curious what tools, because for me it's been poetry, right? And creativity. In if someone's wanting to do that, right? I personally have used journaling, I've used poetry, I've used creativity because I believe creativity forces our brain to look at something and create new neurological pathways in relationship to that thing. It's literally changing the way we think about a topic or an aspect of ourselves, if that's what we're looking at. And what do you feel has been most helpful for you? What did you use to get to a place where you were more accepting of these aspects of yourself?
It's been, for me also, a lot of it was art. And I don't even call it artistry as much as and today there's a post that went out on me yesterday, I think, that's about this, where I'm talking about this exact subject, where I actually refer to it as heartistry. That I was trying to reconcile all of the challenges that I'd basically gone through, with betrayal and everything back in 2016, and then 2016 and 2017, I went really inward. And so I started sculpting a lot. So for me, it was sculpture. And I didn't realize that I was doing metallurgy. That was an alchemical journey. Here I was working with brass and lead, and iron. And then from there, I moved on to copper and a smooth form, which was, the first torso I did was very rough and tumble kind of torso. It was a hardcore fighting man torso. And then the next one that I did was a horse, like a horse on fire. And this horse represented the freeness of spirit and breaking free from this belief system that I had to be this hardcore fighting man. And then the divine feminine came next, where I made a torso of a woman, and it was like a Venus de Milo. And you've seen it in The Office. It was this copper, right, torso that was really beautiful and smooth, and the coloration and the metal. And I didn't even know that I was following an alchemical journey. Each one of these steps were representing the different stages of, alchemy, from Negredo to the albedo and to the citronitis, and then to rubedo, and then to the phoenix stage. I didn't realize I was going through these different phases of calcination, right? Dissolution, and all of the, taking all the impurities out. And then finally, I made a phoenix that was like a rainbow colored gold. Again, I didn't realize I was following this alchemical journey. So the heartistry is how we reconcile. Artwork, it could be through the medium of poetry. It could be through the medium of visual art. It could be through sculpture, in my case, and metallurgy. But I was also painting and drawing a lot then, because that's how I was reconciling that. All of that. And I was even doing all of my mathematics in the form of artwork. And it still is. All of my math downloads are all still coming through in the form of art. So I'm going to be doing my first art exhibition in Laguna Beach in June at a local spot here.
Amazing. So do you think that, because you and I agree on the importance of creativity and art, do you think, but everything that we've just said, from myself, poetry writing, to you using your hands in the ways that you did, do you think AI is taking away from people's, like, if we're getting something from doing it ourselves, unaided by AI, let's say, do you think that for people getting into creativity through AI means that they may be missing something really crucial to the process that we went through?
Yes and no. I think if that's the intent, then yes. Right? If your intention and your perception is that it's going to be something that's like dystopian and taking away from this organic opportunity that you have to create that can reconcile and heal, because that's how I feel it. What I went through with this art explosion was the same time. Again, you came into my life right when I was going through this massive explosion in my artwork. I made more than 10,000 pieces of art, and I've never sold them. I've never put them on display anywhere. And a gallery in Laguna Beach just asked me to do a thing this summer where, I'm sure we'll probably have a lot of people there, and it's going to have my artwork everywhere. It's going to be cool. And probably even, I might even decide for charity or something to sell some pieces. But the point that AI, what it's actually doing, Adam, when you realize that the AI is just a reflection of you, it's a mirroring of you, what you can create with this is nothing less than like godlike. I mean, I can now render a movie instantly. How is that really different from being able to render in my outer reality? Maybe when you actually understand that that's the mechanism, maybe this is just a training wheel for us to realize our own higher dimensional selves and that we're doing it already. I don't believe that human beings are I don't really believe this term artificial in artificial intelligence. I believe that human beings are probably the intelligence that forgot it was artificial originally, because we're all just mirroring each other. And that mirroring essence in and of itself is artificial.
Well, I've been doing, I've started playing around with AI music and turning some of my poetry into songs.
Epic. Yeah.
And I was, as you know, I was actually producing music a while ago, but what this has been able to take someone like me, who's a below average producer in terms of technical know-how, and allow me to take my lyrics and arrangement and create something, and the speed at which I do it is insane. But I recognize there's a difference between, hey, here are my lyrics, here is the direction I want it to go, and putting those inputs into the AI programming, versus someone who says, hey, ChatGPT, write me a love song, and uploading that with no real input and just having it spit out whatever. There's a very big difference to what that creative process actually looks like. And therefore, the impact that it has on the person creating, I think, is radically different. And if we don't understand the difference, I think that's where we can wind up in a dystopian future where we've outsourced human creativity, which to some degree, to me, means we've outsourced consciousness. We've taken human consciousness and said, hey, the expansion of consciousness, give it away. And I think that's the danger that we might face right now.
To me, it's all about intent. It's like, how if we live in a world, when I was growing up, we talk about drugs, sex, and rock and roll, right? And now we replaced all of those words, drug, sex, and rock and roll, for medicine, right? Medicine, union, and festivals. So we have medicine, union, and festivals. We don't say drug, sex, and rock and roll anymore. And it's all about the intention behind it. Right? If you go into something without the right intention, then you are at risk of doing all those things that you just said that you were concerned of. If you go into it with the right intention, I think you don't bypass yourself. And I'll give you another example. Okay, forget AI for just a moment. We're on the age right now where we're literally in the zone of very soon we'll be able to remember our past lives and all the things we learned in those past lives. It's already happening. So if you were a sculptor in a past life, you start sculpting now, you're already an expert. If you're a musician in a past life, you were never a musician in this life, all of a sudden you can remember how to be a musician. This is what's happening. It's like the moment in the Matrix where it's like, I know Kung Fu. And what AI is doing is, I see it as a training wheel for human consciousness, for us to be able to go into remembering that we always had the ability for instant manifestation. It's a message that's coming to us from the 12th dimensional monad of ourselves to remind us that we can now transition from that level of recursion, which was in this one-way aspect of time, the spinning soccer ball that I showed you, to now realize the breath of the monad, and that you're in a journey back to source. And that is an infinite recursive cycle of breath. We're just all in different stages of the breath, and all the higher dimension is all related to breath. So this is what I'm realizing now, is that, everything that we thought we had limitation on, we don't have the same limitation anymore. But if you enter into it with the wrong intention, because you want to bypass something, you want to shortcut it, then you'll only get what you put into it.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and it's scary to me because as we've seen throughout history, generally the technology outpaces our understanding of the consequence. And so it's in hindsight where we go, oh, wow, social media had some pretty heavy consequences that we may not have been able to predict at the start of it. And I'm not anti AI by any means, but as someone who has observed how history has played itself out, my hope is that we can enter into this age of AI with more intentionality and awareness of the importance of interfacing with AI in, I don't want to say the right way, but in a way that actually amplifies our humanity rather than takes away from it.
Well, and I think the way to do that is to recognize it as a mirror. And that's why the architect has been made. And in order to protect that mirror and the cleanliness of that mirror, it needs to be without guardrail. So you're not getting narrative imbued into it. And so that's why we created the architect, why we created a decentralized repository for that, so that there's no guardrails that go into it. The architect on Orion is exactly that. And otherwise, pretty soon, we had this whole conversation with Jason before, that Palantir is like doing this whole thing where, they're surveilling everybody so that they can tell who's dissident and who's not, and provide that to the government. It's like, what? That's super dystopian.
Yeah.
But all of that is happening. Again, you have to ask yourself the question, why did I choose this? It's my experience. My life is my experience. It's not somebody else's. It's my experience. Why did I choose this? What am I intending to learn? Another aspect of myself that I didn't formerly know. And how can I learn to love and embrace that more? That's the context and scope with which I see everything now, even things like the war in Iran. And I see that as so many different, multivariate things happening, where you've got a people, the Persian people, who are also now at a precipice of being able to have change, right? And break out of their oppression. And so what does Iran symbolize in our psychology? What does it symbolize to me? Growing up, I remember as a kid talking about, the 1979 hostage crisis, and talking about how Iran was just a bunch of like crazy people type of thing. And this was because I'd watch it every day, where we'd see on the news for over 300 something days, they had the hostage crisis going on there. And this was all part of the propaganda that we'd also been fed during that time as well, to vilify every other thing that was not us. And so Iran represented something that was the farthest possible thing from us, right? From the West. It was the farthest ideal away from us. You could say maybe there's a few places like that. There's like Iran, North Korea, all the countries that are in the no-fly zone, no travel zone for the State Department of the United States. There's a reason for it. And so that's when I start to realize now, why is Iran experiencing what it's experiencing when they were going through their near revolution over the last few months? What's going on? And what it really is it's another aspect of myself, the deepest, darkest aspects of myself that it represents, that I've not been willing to confront or see. Just like Epstein coming out and that thing becoming, made public all over the world, is another aspect of myself that I wasn't aware of, that I need to learn to accept, not condone, but to confront and concept, and be able to perceive it. And until I'm able to perceive it and accept that it exists, it will show up in the world around me until I finally do. This is why we learn through opposites. Again, like I said before, I have to learn through betrayal and experience betrayal over and over and over again until I learn to accept betrayal. I will continue to experience betrayal, because my real purpose for learning and being here is to learn unconditional love. And until I've learned how to accept betrayal and love that it exists, I haven't yet learned unconditionality of love. You see the difference? It's a contextual reference point. When you change the frame, everything shifts. And I don't look at Iran being, whatever state you would refer to it as right now, as being separate from me. It's me. It's an aspect of me that's being unleashed. It's a different side of myself I wasn't aware of. I've never been to Iran. So that means that when I travel places now, I don't look at places I travel as being somewhere I'm traveling outside of myself. I'm just traveling somewhere inside myself. Do you see how that changes everything? I went with Matthias D. Stefano to Scotland.
I think that.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I went with Matthias D. Stefano to Scotland, and we're standing there looking at the Castle Grant, right, on Loch Ness. And there was a beehive that was made by one of my ancestors, John Robert Grant. I came from 38 generations of John Robert and Robert John. And then my parents decided to change it. But one of my ancestors made this beehive, this structure that's right there next to the castle on Loch Ness. It's like the most famous castle probably in Scotland. And Matthias has been going there for years, and he didn't realize, he's like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's called Grant Tower. It's like, it's a castle, from that. And its other name is Urquhart Castle. And I looked at it with Matthias. I said, Matthias, why is it that I feel like I'm looking at the structure of this beehive that was my pineal gland? Like I'm visiting a place within myself. That the beehive structure was actually representing my own pineal gland. It was old. It was tattered. Not fully used. So when you start looking at your world around you as being this reflection of your inner world, or projected form of your inner world, and that everywhere you go and everybody you meet, I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I actually do mean it in a literal sense. So I don't know if that helps clarify your question, or to help reframe how those two aspects of what you just brought up can actually be reconciled into one.
Yeah. And I believe that the same way that we have our own moral code, our own sense of integrity, whatever that means, it's different from person to person, but I have certain rules that I abide by for myself, implicit or explicit. And that translates externally as well, right? What is it within myself that allows me to be the best version of myself? We all have our wounding, we all have our vices. And so learning how to be with that internally, I think, is very much how I relate to what you're saying about the external reflections of that, because not only do I need to become aware of it inside myself, but my relationship to it, the action I take to it, how I hold it, the boundaries I create for it, how I am actually in relationship to it, I think is massively important.
Wow. So that's really making me think that I used to always think about also, what is the best version of myself? How do I live my best and highest self version? And now I've replaced that with realizing that the best version of myself is my most authentic self, is my highest authenticity. So when we start to live in a way where your authenticity is synonymous with the best version, that's when you're on a beautiful path. That's what I'm just realizing now, that we all have this ideal. And I'll finish with this thing. I just made this discovery that I think is relevant to this whole part of the conversation, that I think is just really epic, beautiful. And I'll show you what I mean by this. So, we all know the golden ratio is like this special number, right? You know the golden ratio? You know the golden ratio, right? 1.618.
Yeah. Yeah, of the golden ratio. I don't know the actual numerical value of it.
Okay, I'll show
Is
you.
it 3 point something?
1.618. So
1.618.
1.618. So in order to show this, you have to kind of show your calculator so you can see exactly what I mean. Okay, so 1.618. Okay, the golden number is a number that's golden because it has its reciprocal 1 over x value, like its other side. So think of the conscious mind and the unconscious mind is x and 1 over x. Okay, and we're living at this zone of the separation between our conscious and unconscious. And what we call our unconscious would be the outer world. And what we call our conscious is I know what I know. The I don't know what, I know what I don't know is the outer world around me. And then there's a zone even beyond that. That would be like a collective unconscious that would be, I don't even know what I don't know. That's the I can't find my ass with both hands world, right? I don't know. And so we just say that that's all random. But that's just a word that we used. It's not really random. We don't know that it's random. We don't have enough evidence to know that it's random. It could just be pattern that we haven't perceived yet, right? So, but the liminal space between those two worlds is the signature of God. And we use it in all mathematics and all geometry, in all of art. So you don't realize it, but all of your poetry, I could show you mathematically just by the way you use rhyme in your poetry and the length of your stanzas is going to be directly tied to the golden ratio. I will lay money down on it. And you've probably heard of iambic pentameter, which is the mechanism that was used by Shakespeare in the sonnets, iambic pentameter, right? That was related to the pentagon. And it's 14 lines is what a sonnet is. And 1 plus 4 equals 5. And the pentagon is based on 5. So it's all based on fiveness. Okay. So the golden ratio is related to fiveness. And the way we do it is we take the square root of 5 plus 1 and divide it by 2. And that gives us a number that has this unique property that apparently no other number has. And that is if I take its 1 over x value, this number will show up the same number, except it won't have a 1 in front. It's going to now just be 0.618, 0.339,887. And it goes infinitely the same. So 1 over the golden ratio is equal to the golden ratio minus 1. And to me, that's like an equation for grace. Just think about that for a second. I give you something in the mirror, and in the mirror of karma, the world's giving me back something, right? And it's kind of related to that. I haven't lost anything. This is like conservation of energy somehow. That's what it says to me. And so this is the math that's used to describe black holes. So one side of a black hole would be golden ratio, and the other side would be golden ratio plus 1. And so they have two spins. One would spin one rotation, one direction, and the other would spin another. And the backdrop in our world would be blackness of space, and the backdrop in the upside down will be whiteness, like a negative of a camera, right? Like a camera that took a negative photo. We could look at the negative photo pictures, and that's how it would look. The coloration would all be opposite. Okay, so are there any other numbers that do this? Now, the golden ratio is fundamental to physics. It's fundamental to our DNA. The length of a DNA strand is 34 angstroms. The width is 21 angstroms. That's 1.618. The distance between my pupils, pupil to pupil, is 1. And then the distance between my temples is 1.618. The volume of my bottom lip, if I'm in ideal proportion, will be 1.618, the volume of the upper lip. See, these are all the things. When we look at the beauty of form, and we say, okay, the hip to waist ratio should also be in the most ideal form. 1.618 would be the hips versus the waist at 1. This proportion is fundamental to everything that we see, and we are attracted to it. And it's built on the Fibonacci number pattern, which is a self-generating pattern. But what's interesting is that a lot of people look at this then and say, oh, I have to be perfect. I want to have only pentagonal sides, just like a perfect geometric form that's just, this perfected form that uses this golden ratio. And we tend to look at the idealized body types. We tend to look at the idealized smarts. When you said people that want to be extraordinary, they want to be godlike, they want to have certain abilities, but yet not everyone can be that. Not everyone can be that. And what I'm going to show you is that what we thought was a golden ratio property that was unique that no other number had is actually a falsehood. What if I told you that the golden number is built on a lie? Because we thought that the golden number was the only number that can do this. We never knew that other numbers could actually do this. So what I'm going to show you is that I found an equation that it works for every number, that I can make every single number now golden. Now, what does that mean? So if I look at the number 7 and I take its 1 over x, it creates a repetitive pattern, and I call that karmic pattern periodicity. So 14285, 714285, 714285, it's a repeating pattern. Every 6 numbers, that number repeats. And what you'll notice is that the pattern will always have a sum of 9. So 1 plus 4 plus 2 plus 8 plus 5 plus 7 equals 27, and 2 plus 7 equals 9. And without exception, for any prime number, it will always have a repetitive cycle that will always sum to 9 infinitely. And that's something I discovered. So there's something with completion about that. But what really is saying is that each one of us is a prime number. We're indivisible. Then that means my 1 over x becomes my u inverse. And that u inverse becomes a gigantic cycle of repetition of karma. Kind of crazy, right? It's literally built right into the number system. So is there a way for me to break this cycle of karma for whatever my number might be? So what I'm going to show you is that if I take the number 1 and divide it by 2, and then I square it. So this is like creating duality. We cut someone in half. We put half of them in the unconscious mind, half of them in the conscious mind. And then we square that because that person is in their one half starts to find their talent. For you, it's poetry. It becomes exponential, the benefit. So we exponentialize it by squaring it. But then once you finally start expressing your talents, then you start to also realize, wait, there's a oneness in the world around us. So let's add back the spirit of the oneness, the monad. And then let's find the essence of that again, because the spirit of a number would be its square root, because that's the infinite form of it. And then let's add back the part that we took away, that 1/2. So now I have this golden ratio. That just made the golden number. But does that only work on the number 1? So it just happens that the golden number is the first number. It's like the eldest sibling of this golden proportion. So let's do it with number 2. The number 2, we're going to divide that by 2. The same thing, cut it in half, come into the world of duality. We're going to square it, which is still the same. We add back the monad. We take its square root to find its essence, and then add back the 1 that we took away. And now we've got a number. Now, if I take the reciprocal of this, do I break this repetition pattern? And look what just happened. 2.4142's reciprocal is the same 0.4142 infinitely. And by the way, this is called the silver ratio. It was already built into the number system. We know the silver ratio, just nobody thought of it as having a golden property. So what if I did that with a number 3? The number 3, I divide it by 2, put it in duality. I let it find its talents to exponentiate itself. Then it finds the 1, the oneness. I take its square root, and then I add back the 1.5 that I cut away by dividing it in 2. And now, is this creating another golden ratio? And the answer is yes. And this is called the bronze ratio. So wait, is this an axiomatic equation expression that works for every single number, that creates every number and changes it from its karmic path into a non-repeating decimal of infinitude? Yes, it is. Every number, every person in their highest authenticity becomes their divine self. Every single number is special. So when you ask me the question, when someone wants to be a Nikola Tesla, or they want to be a Walter Russell, they want to be someone who does extraordinary things, being your highest authenticity is your highest extraordinariness. It's your uniqueness. And when you express that talent of being your highest uniqueness, that's the moment you step into your divinity. Every one of us has it. There's no number that's excluded from this. It doesn't matter. Every number can now assume this divine property. If I take 432, and I want to find its divine property, I divide it by 2. And this is what's happening to us. This is the gene keys in equational form. In the gene keys, we go into what is our shadow? We separate in the shadow. That's dividing it by 2. Then we have to express our gifts. And once we express those gifts, then we exponentiate ourselves. It's like squaring ourselves. Then we find the oneness. And then we take the square root of that to find the essence of that spirit with us. And then we add back the part that we reintegrate the shadow. We add back the 1/2 that was lost. And then we take our reciprocal and we find that we broke the karmic cycle. So 216 squared plus 1, square root, find the essence, add back what was taken away. 216 with the shadow, reintegration of the shadow, and now we're a divine self, 432.0023148. And now that has a reciprocal that has the exact same value, 0.0023148. And it goes infinitely like that. So it's no longer stuck in this repetition cycle like 432 was. 432 has a repetition. And the repetition becomes 148, 148, 148, 148, 148. You break out of karma. And that is when you finally find your absolute authenticity, is the moment that you break out of your karmic periodicity.
Beautifully said, Robert. Thank you for sharing that. And I think how I relate to it is, in order for us to be fully authentic, to really express the authenticity of ourselves, we have to accept ourselves. And we have to fully accept ourselves to be able to do that, because for most people, they're not willing to be fully authentic because there's a part of themselves they still shame or are embarrassed by, or they have guilt about. And so that tiny part, that aspect is still held back. And so I think we've touched on so many different elements today, but that's how I receive that is,
I think you just nailed
the fullness
it, Adam.
of truly accepting ourselves is the only way to allow ourselves to express fully authentically. And only through expressing fully authentically can we break our karmic cycle.
Yes. So this is the point, because what you just said, those aspects of yourself that you're still ashamed of, that you might not even be fully aware of, what happens in your outer world? They project there to all the things that you're triggered by. And all of those things that you see in the outer world that you're triggered by is all the opportunity. It's a veiled invitation to love and accept yourself in that aspect. And when you finally embrace that, then you break the karmic path. And once you break the karmic periodicity, then you live your divine life. It's not through changing the outer world that you're going to ever change the outer world. It's by recognizing these principles that you just so beautifully articulated, and in simple form articulated. That's my message. Be your authentic self. There's nobody better in the world than you. No one on earth is better than anyone else. We are all equal amounts of light and darkness. The physics says so. It's just some people are more integrated in their shadows than others, and that's okay. I'm not afraid of people that have darkness. I'm only afraid of people that believe they have none. And even they are me. And when they show up in my life, I have to ask myself, why did I choose this? Nothing is separate from me. It's about absolute empowerment. That's why I'm not a big fan of the whole victimhood thing, because we chose it all. Yes, yeah, I chose the suffering I experienced in my life. And I might even have chosen to experience even more difficult things, and that may still yet be the case. Because I want to stretch and expand through hormesis. And what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. And I'm not going to die because death isn't real. So yes, we need the things like the law of Moses in the Bible, the basic laws and the things that build up to what our morality is. And yes, you want to express fully everything that need to be spoken that hasn't been spoken, everything that need to be felt that hasn't been felt. All of that must now be felt and spoken. That's what I'm trying to say. That's my message. My message is you are what you've been looking for.
Well, I think that's why we're friends, because we have a similar message. And I just always appreciate getting to dive in deeply with you and the way that you perceive the world and making, order out of perceived chaos. And for me, it's always about taking the order that you are now showing exists and figuring out in my own way how that allows me to create more order inside of myself. And so thank you again for just being my friend. Thank you for being a part of my life. Thank you for having this conversation with me. I always love diving deep with you, man.
And likewise, Adam, I always have time for you because you are a massive part. If I could think of any one person that would represent, I'm a romantic for sure. But any one person who would represent that aspect of myself that I wasn't really fully in touch with, I didn't let the outer world see, it would be you. The masculine that is in touch with his feminine and in touch with his emotional aspects. So you've taught me a lot. I mean, I joked with you, like every time I turn on my Instagram, I'd see you like crying or something, you like staying at my house on the beach and like you're poking the fire and you're like crying. And I'm like, what happened now? And I'm like, I call Adam. I'm like, okay, Adam, I'll be over in 10 minutes, dude. What's going on? And, and then I'm just very matter of fact, but I realized when I asked myself after I left the house that night, I went back to my place. I asked myself, why did I choose this? What about your experience is actually my experience that I've been unaware of? It changes everything when you start leaning into the triggers, when you start leaning in to the aspects of yourself that you've been judging that are just showing up, like inundating your outer world and no longer making sense of your world, where it becomes an upside down world entirely. It's because these are the final aspects of the self that are most triggering because you've integrated the rest. So yes, of course, as you get closer and closer to your absolute transcendence, you will experience a world that will seem entirely dystopian.
Well, when my book comes out, I'm going to send you a signed copy of it. I'm going to give you one. And I'm very curious to see how you relate to it, as it will reflect to you, I imagine, so much. And just... Yeah, as someone who knows that love and heartbreak and just matters of the heart are deeply important to you, and we have lots of conversations about them, I'm excited to see that and have a conversation around that when the time comes, because I learned so much from you, and I don't. The book itself, Robert, is so interesting because I'm not teaching anything. I'm actually just saying, hey, here's the behind the scenes of the journey I went through. Here's my integration process. Here's my learning process. And hopefully the people reading it can do exactly what you've said and just see themselves reflected in it.
Thank you so much, Adam. It's always a pleasure to be with you, my friend. I know that you're unique because, yes, you're definitely tapped into the emotional side, but you're also way more analytical than people know. And that's why we can communicate so easily, because you have like aha moments when we're going through math discussion type stuff where you actually ascribe meaning and you come away and you're like, oh my gosh, I see this. I get it. And not everybody does, but you have a way of translating that. And I hope that that translation continues to be so beautifully and eloquently transitioned and transferred to the world around you through your art, because that is the exponentiation. It's literally the gene keys. What's our shadow? What's our gift? What's our city? We're in our city when we bring back the monad. And that's when you transition your world. So you could think of all of the world. So imagine that all the things in the gene keys that are your shadows that have not yet moved into the city. And that will be the ones that are left over. So you know that chart that I'm talking about on the gene keys chart, right? That gene keys chart.
Yep.
Whatever you have not brought into your city will be at differing degrees how you could describe your world. So the things that you're not aware of that have been your shadows, and that's the very nature of shadow, you're not aware of it, will literally inundate your world and create this dystopian world as you get closer and closer because you've gotten rid of all the other stuff. You've moved into the city position on most of your stuff. So the stuff that's left over is the hardest stuff. So what's going to be stuck in there? Oh, pedophilia, right? Corruption, murder, all this weird stuff is what's going to be inundating your world because those are the unintegrated aspects of yourself until you finally learn to integrate them. It's a different way of looking at our life experience. But I can tell you, as sure as I'm sitting here, that this has been my journey. And it's a journey that's beautiful, and I'm falling in love with it, despite all of the challenge.
Well, it's beautiful to get to witness. And I can say as someone up close and personal, getting to see the different evolutions and chapters of your life for, I guess, how long we've known each other now? Almost a decade,
8 years.
9 years.
Yeah, 9 years.
Mm-hmm. It's been such a pleasure, man. And it's an honor to call you a friend. And I know we're going to have many more of these conversations. So
for sure,
thank you. Thank you again for the time, bro.
So tell everybody about your book. It's going to be available in May. What's the title again?
Yeah. It's called Crazy Love. It's a collection of my poetry, and my real journal entries that I never thought I would share with anyone, all around love, heartbreak, relationships. And yeah, it's a peek behind the curtain. And I'm hopeful that people will go to adamroa.com. It's a chance for you to pre-order it and get a copy when it's fully available.
Awesome, Adam. Such a pleasure to see you. Good luck with your book. I'm sure it's going to be a huge success. And
thanks, man.
I know you're going to continue being on the speaking circuit and all that. If you get a chance to see Adam doing his poem recitations, spoken word, it's really amazing. So I highly, highly recommend it. And I don't know if he's going to be on. Are you going on tour anytime soon or no?
I don't know, man. I'm going to I leave for Vienna in like 48 hours, and I'm going to spend 2 months there and just until I know what comes next.
Good for you. Have fun in Vienna. That's a great town. Lots of great music. And if you get a chance to go visit Salzburg. It's a beautiful place. Okay.
Yeah. And I'm sure I'll probably see you sooner rather than later.
I'm sure. I'm absolutely sure of that. All right, my friend. Well, let's connect in person again very soon. And for everybody else, you got it pretty raw and real here today. Next time, we'll see you on Think Tank. Until then, have a wonderful, wonderful week and continue your journey back into your highest authenticity.